So now we have the car in the scene, and we're going to talk about different types of cameras and how they can affect the way the car looks, especially if you're rendering without a backplate, for example in a studio like we have here. So we can take a quick look at the camera settings. By default, the most important thing, by default the camera focal length is here. It's set to 28mm, also just under 29mm. Now that's, in my opinion, pretty wide for a car, I guess, but it's always down to personal preference, and I usually prefer 35mm, so it's only a little bit more, but it makes the front of the car look nice and long and nice and mean. So, and also like a 55, which again it's sort of it gives that sort of long sort of nose in the front and then a nice compact rear. And then we can go up to 85. You can see now the car is getting a little bit more compressed, especially around the front here. It's looking a bit squashed compared to the rear, as it's more in the center of the lens. And if we say go, for example, 105, you can see again the front of the car is just becoming a little bit smaller, and it looks a bit funny. If you look at the front wheel and look at the rear wheel, they look quite big and quite small. So I think for this one, maybe 55 is looking good. And we can, of course, you can change here all the different sensor presets. So if you shoot a backplate with a APS-C, like a crop sensor, then you can adjust it to this and match it there. So, and of course with this we have like the clipping. So if there's objects in front of a camera, or if you're doing an interior shot, for example, you can use the clipping to basically just cut away objects that are too close to the camera, but you want to see maybe a bit more of the car, and then you don't have to hide any geometry. One thing I do like in the newer versions of VRED is that you have your nice tone mapping. So we have physical camera, and personally I prefer to use filmic. It just gives a bit more a natural feel to the image. And of course you've got now ACES color space, which for now we won't talk about because it's a big complicated subject in itself, so we'll just stick to sRGB. And of course you have fog, and you can play around with this if you want to add some fog effects in there, and a bit of noise like this, something like that. And you can play around with this, make some nice cool things. Of course you have glare, so in a sunny day or the weather's lights on, you can this is a bit too much, but we can bring that down and maybe take down the threshold so it's only sort of lights, strong lights, but we can make some really nice nice effects with the glare, and of course the glow, and there's basic color correction, so you could make it warmer or make it a bit colder, add some more contrast and brightness, saturations. But you can also do that with this, so it's fairly good. And, you can play with the exposure. And so yeah, I mean personally I prefer, like for example, the rear shots. It's probably sort of like my favorite sort of rear three-quarter. It's sort of the lower you go, the bigger, if you want a big sort of action shot like this, you'd see it probably more on front of a car magazine. And you can play around, and sort of, if you want to go really crazy, then you can do something like this. But personally I would say between anything like 35 and 85, that's my kind of sort of range which I prefer. And I think most cars will look good between these ranges, and can get really nice looking shots. So if you wanted to go up, you can get sort of like that zoom lens kind of feel from 85mm. And if you want to get up nice and close, these kinds of things, these lenses are pretty nice, and you don't get any sort of crazy distortion like you would with a much wider lens. But it's just down to personal preference, and if that's what you like, then so be it. And yeah, it's not a problem. But yeah, for me, as I said, between 35, 85, on certain cars maybe go up to 105, then you know the car will generally look good. Another good feature inside VRED is the sort of the viewpoint or the viewport. Another good feature inside VRED is the viewpoint creation inside the perspective camera. So what I like to do is right click, go to create and create a viewpoint. And what that will do is just create basically a viewpoint, as you know the name suggests, that will add here, and so you can move around. You think, okay, I like this angle. You press capture, and you can move around here. And I think you could probably, you know, change probably focal length, maybe go a bit like this, and then you can go back into your track and press capture again. Yeah, that'll just keep adding them, and then you know you can easily switch between these views with just a click of the button, and you know you can just press play and it'll slowly move through like a slideshow. And that's a great way to just set up sort of, you know, cameras really quickly, and sort of you can use them to switch between, you know, you might like the angle like this, you press capture, or you know maybe a bit lower, you can press capture, and then you know you can easily compare the two. And this is great for, you know, getting quick feedback and just overall sort of getting a great idea really quickly on what angles work for the car and which angles don't work for the car. So you know it's, you know, in 30 seconds you have 7 angles, and you think, okay, these are the ones I'll keep. You can delete them, and you say, okay, yeah, these are the ones that I'll go for. And then you can see, and one thing you do have to look out for is that if you change, for example, the focal length in here, it will see, as long as you've had this selected, it will, you know, do it straight away. Whereas if you go into the viewport, and then if you, for example, change this to say 35, you won't see that straight away. You have to double click just to go back in there, and you know you can go back, and you can also easily click edit and then go to set to current view, and then that will update that new viewpoint to that view that you just created. So I hope that's been helpful for you and the cameras, and we can move on to some different lighting types. Okay, so now that we have an understanding how cameras work inside VRED, we can try and match a camera into a backplate and a HDRI using a HDRI and a backplate from the asset manager. So we can go up to scene and then to asset manager, and then here up on the tabs we have environments and scene plates. So what we can do is we can go to materials, and then we can just drag and drop our HDRI into our environments, and then that will automatically add the HDRI to the environment and enable it in the scene. So we can also then go to the backplates, and then we can find our matching backplate, and then we can just right click and then add to scene plate editor. So as you can see, we have a nice looking sphere, nice road, early morning, and what we can do is then we can turn on our scene plate, and then we can start to try and match the camera. So what we can do now is open the EXIF data of the backplate and see what focal length was used to take the backplate. And a good way to do that is if you head to scene and head to scene plate editor, you can look at your scene plate, you can right click and press show information. Another box will pop up with the information from the camera, but unfortunately in this backplate there is no information. So there's usually, you would see in your focal length what lens was used. So another way we can do that was check the website that this backplate was listed on, and it took me a few minutes to find out that that was actually a 35mm. So what we can do is we can head into our focal length and just change that to 35, and then now our focal length of our camera is matching the one that it was used to take the backplate. And then it's just a question of sort of playing around, getting a nice idea of you know, where the car might sit in the road. You can play around with the roll here as well, you know, if there's a slight angle on the roll or on the road or in the camera. And then of course you can go into your track and create a viewpoint, and here's some I already made. and then you just decide which one you like the most, and then you can sit with that. Another good way would be to maybe create some geometry for the road or surroundings. So we can go into scene and create a plane, and then we can just drop that in, and then what I do is just lift it a little bit higher than the actual car or the actual shadow. So when you drag it across, and then you can see, you try and match it up with the road itself, and as you can see, it's slightly off, so we can maybe just rotate the camera a little bit, try and match it. And it'll never be 100% perfect, because there's always lens distortion and things like this, which can make it a little bit inaccurate. But it's a nice sort of way to have a good idea of the road and how it follows and things like this. So you want to ride it back a little bit like this, and then that could be your road, and then we could just hide this. And then as you can see, the car is slightly off center, so what you would do is maybe move the car itself, but in this case you want to try and keep the car in the same position, because then you're always on the origin. And you could even turn on the grid and just play around with it till you get something that's a little bit more accurate. So there are different ways to do it, but as long as it looks good and you have the right focal length, camera matching, it should look good in the end. And as I said, just make sure you have the right focal length, otherwise the car will look wrong. And we can just have a quick test here. If we drop this down to say 24mm and find a nice position on the road, as you can see, it just doesn't look right. Something's a little bit off. And again, if you go to say 85mm, which is quite extreme, you're going to see again the front of the car is completely off and just doesn't look right at all. So as long as you've got the right focal length, you can play around until you've got something that looks good. Obviously it will help if you have some reference. For example, sometimes we use a standing car, so you get an idea of the scale, an idea of where the position of the car would be on the road. And also another good thing to have is the height of the tripod and height of the camera. So then in the world space you could place, for example, your camera at the right height. So here now it's around 150 centimeters. It should be about right. And then you can dial it in there, and you can play around with the roll. If there's a little bit of tilt in the road or something like that, then you can just do that and play around until you've got something that looks good. And I think for now, this for playing around for a few minutes, it looks pretty good. And that's how you would match your camera inside VRED.